Hello, everybody, and welcome to Where is the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. My name is Jane Liu, and I'm with my co-host, Sabrina Fruhoff. Sabrina, it's been a while since I last seen you. How was Germany? I know you had a wild adventure abroad.
Yes, hi Jane. It's so great to reconnect with you. Yeah, it was wonderful. Actually, this time I had a hard time leaving. It was such good 2 weeks. I spent a lot of quality time with my mom and my family. We did some hiking in the Alps. There was some great foliage and new trails were being discovered. And yeah, I just had a really good time, like lots of outdoors, especially like around the lakes in Bavaria. So really beautiful. I reconnected with some old friends, made some new friends, and yeah, and of course Oktoberfest was wild, but I'm glad that it's back after 2 years of not having it. How have you been?
Seriously, I've been good. Well, since the last time we talked, I've started not a new job, but just a new like focus in my job. And it's been really rewarding. It's been challenging. And I feel like, as you know, I've been looking for kind of new challenges in my role. And so I feel like this has been such a good like transition for me. And just honestly, spending time after wedding and honeymoon and really focusing my energy back on work has been really refreshing too. Um, so it's been good. Thank you for asking. And I was very jealous of your Germany trip. The photos looked incredible. It looked like so much fun. So
One
I'm
day
very,
you'll
very
come with me.
jealous. Yes, I would love that. Um, and Sabrina, I'm so excited about today. And today is just you and me. We do not have a guest today, but I'm really excited because our topic is around setting boundaries with friends. I know this is so top of mind for the both of us, and really just like so curious to hear your perspective on this, as I feel like you've done a ton of work in this area and I'm starting to learn more about that. I'm starting to practice some of the techniques as well. So really excited to learn more from you.
Yes, I'm excited to dive in. Ironically, the term boundary really relates to our topic of the subject of our
Yes.
podcast. Where's the line? So yeah, excited. Yeah, so why don't we dive right in? This was on the heels of a lot of just events that happened over the last couple of months, but I also think this goes way beyond like just the most recent months in terms of boundaries, setting boundaries, especially with friends, as we talk about today, has a lot of sort of impact, or it relates a lot to where you are in your own self-growth journey. So I just want to
Mhm.
share a quick anecdote, because I think I would share about this topic way differently a few years ago versus now. But in terms of setting boundaries, I think it has a lot to do with where you are in terms of self-acceptance and self-respect and how you know yourself. So self-awareness plays a lot into this topic. So for the audience today, everyone is on their own journey, right? And again,
Mhm.
just have some grace and compassion for yourself on where you are. Setting boundaries is really tough, and it's actually much harder to reinforce them, which we'll get into. But for me, I really not I didn't have like a breakthrough, I would say, but especially in my therapy and in just like talking through it with friends and coaches, there's been a lot of revelations around being willing to have difficult conversations at the cost of something not working out in how you would hope. And I'm saying how you would hope in terms of maybe someone, when you set a boundary, they would leave your life, etc. But
Right.
so for me, that was like a big discovery. Like whoever is sticking with me after I set the boundary, those are the people that you really want to care about, versus if you end up losing someone once you set the boundary that's important to you, you've gained your own respect, you've had your own back, you stood your ground, you spoke your truth, and that's way more important. And sometimes it comes at the expense of potentially losing someone, which is sad, but at the end of the day, you have you're your own best advocate, right? And so in a lot of this like self-development journey, I learned that that's really critical. So yeah, Jane, I would love to hear from you. Do you have any recent examples of setting boundaries with friends, etc.?
Yeah. And That is so valuable to have you share that too, because I feel like I am going through my own journey and I'm realizing a lot of times that boundaries don't necessarily have to be this huge expectation or hurdle or like this scary thing. It can be little things as well. And a lot of times little things like little boundaries help ensure that you have, you know, like good mentality, good mental health, and sometimes maybe even physical health. When you asked me this question, the first thing I thought of is actually setting boundaries with you recently. And also just to clarify too, I don't know if we set the stage here, but we're talking primarily about setting realistic expectation and boundaries with friends today. So we're talking like a range of acquaintances, new friends, but also old friends and like deeper relationships that you have with friends. So when you asked me this question, I thought of my conversation with you recently, where you know, we agreed to connect last Friday to just catch up and see what's going on in each other's lives. I just so happened to have a really crazy week. It was high anxiety for me. I was really struggling mental health wise. And coming into that Friday, I knew it was not going to be a productive or a positive or a happy conversation with you. I would have just complained. And I knew that that's not how I really wanted to spend my time talking to you on. And so I literally just texted you. I was like, hey, I am having a really rough week at work, and like there's nothing to worry about, but Friday is not a good time for me to chat. I'm not in a good mental headspace. Can we talk on Monday instead? And I appreciated you being super flexible, being super sympathetic or empathetic, and really just giving me the space. But I guess as we're talking through this, maybe we should just rewind a little bit and maybe start from the beginning of how do you even set healthy boundaries, right? Like, what can we actually set boundaries around? Like, what are the parameters? What are examples of some of those boundaries? I would love to hear like what you think of that.
Absolutely. And that's a great question. So let's level set with everyone, because I had to do some research on this. So boundaries
Mhm.
can be set in across many different domains. But what I found, it can be emotional energy. It can be boundaries around your time, right? Like personal space, sexuality, morals and ethics, or even possessions and finances, as well as social media, which I think it's
Mm,
gaining rising importance for us all. Like, how much time do we spend on social media? What do we put on social media, right? What do we post, etc. And so from there, the question arises, like, what is a healthy boundary? So in terms of time, like, do you own your time? Or from a, like, well, across all the domains, like, do you have self-respect?
mhm.
In terms of timing, like, don't overcommit yourself, or how much time do you commit to another person versus yourself? Like, if you're more of a, this ties into introvert versus extrovert, but where do you get energy from? And then where do you set your boundary accordingly?
Mhm.
How to say no, that's a big one, which I have a lot
Yep.
of trouble in saying no if you don't have the capacity or the energy. Also how to set limits for others without feeling bad. So I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm more of an empath. So
Mm,
feeling bad is a big part of me. Like, I just, that's a big boundary. Like, how can I put myself first while still being empathetic, but being able to distinguish and setting limits when it's just doesn't serve me.
yeah.
So yeah. And then the last part is like, yeah, well, a healthy boundary can be really established when you have a strong sense of your identity in terms of how much respect you have for yourself, what do you know yourself, do you know what you want and need, etc. And
Mhm.
I always want to quote some good old Brené Brown, but she
Yes.
says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. As well as, how can we expect people to put value on our work when we don't value ourselves enough to set and hold uncomfortable boundaries? So I think that just really brings it home in terms of, yeah, like, how do we expect other people to respect us if we clearly don't respect ourselves? So boundaries can really help with that. And the
Mhm.
people that are meant for you and stay in your life, like, they're the ones that are going to respect your boundaries. So Jane, with all of this theory, that's all great, but like, why do you think so many people struggle setting boundaries, and why are some people really good at it?
Yeah. Oh, I feel like it really goes back to like understanding yourself and holding yourself accountable, like what you're talking about. I 100% relate to the fact that I really struggle to say no. And when I do say no, I feel really bad. And I feel that my default answer should always be yes. And I feel like there's also a lot of conversation about like saying yes to things, like all these almost like recommendations for always say yes. And that's how you're going to have this crazy life or all these adventure. But in reality, for a lot of people, that's super draining. And I think it requires a lot of personal work, both on the person setting the boundary as well as the person receiving the boundary or like receiving that feedback. It doesn't always work very well if the person giving boundary is not fully capable or like comfortable in doing that. But I think we also talked about like some people are not very good at receiving the boundary that is set because they are insecure themselves or they are worried about the relationship that they have with you as like your friendship. And so it's tough, right? Because I feel like just going back to the example that I gave where I asked you for time and space, I I knew that I can be comfortable doing that because number one, I know that my relationship with you is solid, and I know that you also feel that way with me. So if I were to set that boundary to say, hey, I don't feel comfortable talking today, then you're not going to take it in a different way. I can imagine in some relationships where if people don't feel comfortable, they would then like start getting anxious, start going down a rabbit hole, feeling like, oh, well, XYZ person doesn't want to be my friend. So I think it requires a lot of work, both on the person giving the boundary as well as the person receiving the boundary. At least that's my perspective. But what do you think?
Oh, 100%. And yes, I can only echo that. So it's one thing about being able and having the courage to set the boundary, right, at the cost of whatever comes with that. But to your point, also about the receiving end, and I think this again goes to the whole journey of where everyone is in their own self-development and self-growth, and how much can you stand up for yourself, but also take the ego out of it a little bit, right? Like when you set that boundary with me, I knew this was nothing against me. I knew you were dealing with some stuff and there was no question in my mind that you're taking care of yourself. And I actually applauded that. So it gave me like more respect for you in a way whereas maybe my younger self would have felt really offended and
Right.
questioned myself, like, oh my God, does Jay not want to be my friend? And oh God, I would go down a rabbit hole of questioning myself, my own worth. And I know we're not talking about dating today or boundaries in dating, but definitely been there where I just, whenever, you get that rejection, quote unquote, you might
Right.
question yourself. But a lot of it is applicable in today's conversation as it relates to friendships. You just have to sometimes just take the ego out of it and just realize there is a million factors that are affecting that other person
Right.
that has nothing to do with you. And in 99% of the cases, it's not related to you. So yeah, long story short, I think it just really it goes to show on how confident you are with yourself, how do you know your own worth, and how much sort of inner work you've done, and that it usually has nothing to do with you.
Right. And I feel like to your point exactly, you yourself have done a ton of work around not only like ensuring that you are comfortable in yourself, but also I feel like you've been practicing setting boundaries with other people that you will understand when other people set boundaries with you. To your point exactly, and I've shared this with you previously too, that like when I was younger, I also didn't really understand that, right? And so when people set those boundaries with me, I spiral out of control and I start blaming people, feeling like, and I think part of it is just insecure. Part of it is I'm not mature enough at the time to have understood that that person just needed space. Or maybe part of it is as you get older, you become more empathetic. You start to understand like other people are going through personal things. The world doesn't revolve around you. And right, like but some of that just comes with doing the work. Some of that comes with growing older and having experienced things. And so I think that's kind of the tough part. Like everybody is in their own journey and not everybody is at the same, whether that be maturity level or level of understanding of these boundaries. So I think it really depends on the recipient, and like depending on who that person is, your approach may be different in how you set that boundary, or like you may need to do more reassurance for that person so that they don't feel like they're left out in the open with no, no answers to how your relationship is. So
Mhm.
100% agree with you.
Yeah, I love how you just laid out this journey for yourself, because I think it has a lot to do with maturity. So that's such a key
Yeah.
point. Do you have any examples, Jane, on like what if the recipient does not accept the boundary?
Yeah.
Or because I know it is also, yes, we want to stay true to ourselves, and we want to, when we enforce the boundary, but we also feel we're humans, right? So there may be times where we feel guilty. So where is the line in that? Do you have any
Yeah.
examples?
This is such a tough question. I think like if I'm being if I'm living in this perfect idealistic world, then the answer is like, ultimately, if people don't respect your boundaries, you need to leave that relationship. Like whether that's a relationship with a partner or friends type of relationship or friendship. Obviously, that's not the most realistic thing in our world, right? Like you can't just up and leave every possible thing. And I think part of it is just being understanding that this other person is also going through their journey. They may not have set boundaries with other people, so they may not understand when you are trying to set boundaries with them. But I also think like part of it is thinking through the level of kind of relationship that you have with them. So thinking about like friends, right? There's like a spectrum of friends. If you are talking to a new friend or an acquaintance or someone that you maybe don't have a super developed relationship with, then like maybe it's easy to just say, okay, I'm not going to see this person anymore. I don't feel like I feel like this will develop into a toxic relationship. I'm not getting the right vibes. Whereas if you are talking to a friend that has had a long relationship with you and deep relationship with you, number one, I hope that they can already understand. Like you don't need to give an example as to why you need that boundary. So that's number one, like surround yourself with people that are gonna understand you. But number two is like, if you know someone needs that additional reassurance, you can always give them that reassurance so that your close friends, you can stay close and keep them close to you without like sacrificing this relationship just to hold that boundary for yourself. Again, like hopefully in that situation, you can still stay true to yourself, set that boundary with your close friends, reassuring them that your relationship is still strong, that you still want to see them, spend time with them, and you still care about them. And you may need to do a little bit more work of explaining why you need that boundary and like what your current situation may be. But that way, hopefully it doesn't like sacrifice the relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, you raised so many good points. And this reminds me of a quote that I recently read by Nick Vial. Shout out to the Bachelor. How a boundary is only as good as its enforcement, right? And even though you may feel like proud, oh yeah, I set the boundary, and then
Right.
they actually don't want to talk to you, or they're giving you like a hard time, and then you might backtrack and you might question yourself again. So I think you're hitting all the right points in terms of being sympathetic and empathetic sometimes, and sometimes you just have to spend a little bit more time of re-explaining, which is often the harder part, right? So yeah, so you touched on it a little bit, but in summary, Jane, like, is there a how to communicate a boundary? I know you said you've touched on
Yeah.
it, but for our listeners, just like a summary of giving some advice on that.
Yeah. Oh, this is really tough. And I know it's very like situation dependent or like friend dependent. But I think like honestly, be sympathetic, whether you are the person giving the boundary or like setting the boundary or receiving the boundary. From a setting boundary perspective, like understand that your friend may not be at the same, like whether that be maturity level or like through this journey as far along as you may be. And so understanding that they may need more reassurance rather than just saying, hey, I'm not okay to talk to you today. Can I talk to you tomorrow? Maybe you need to say, hey, I need space today because of XYZ, and like laying things out and then saying, hey, I still love you. Can I talk to you this other day? I'm really looking forward to it, right? Like showing that you are showing that you are still eager to see them. It's not their fault that you need this space. Like giving them that extra reassurance a lot of times will help like guide that conversation. So just being sympathetic on both ends, I think it's honestly like a core part of this relationship. I also think practice how you want to deliver it, especially if you're unsure. I felt like my text to you was very quick and very like, because I knew you were going to be on board. You were totally okay giving me space. I wasn't worried at all. But if anybody is worried about how the person is going to receive certain things, like practice it. Think about the audience that you are giving it to. Again, going back to being sympathetic. As you kind of deliver this message, you can, number one, think about like, is this a realistic expectation to set with my friend? Do I need to give more context to my friend? Should I give a clear, like some people can be very ambiguous, like, hey, I'm not ready to talk today, but you don't give them a clear date as to when you can talk to them. Some people maybe just need the reassurance of like, hey, I'm not going to talk to you today, but I'll talk to you tomorrow. And that will make a difference for people. So just practice delivering that. Obviously that applies to not just friends, like family. I know a lot of times that can be a really tough conversation as well to set those boundaries. So practicing ahead of time will allow you time to reflect on the message that you're delivering to them. And then also just giving yourself grace, right? Like you are going through the tough time. You are the one who need the boundary. You are the one who set it. And if like even earlier you asked the question of like when people don't accept a boundary, I feel like a lot of that has happened when I was younger, where I didn't uphold the boundary. And then I feel bad. I feel good. Like just don't. Give yourself grace, give yourself time and the space. Like hold your boundaries strong. Don't let people like abuse that. That is not a good behavior to set as a standard. So that's at least my thought, but yeah, would love your thought too.
Yeah, no, I want to double down on a few things you said, especially in terms of how you communicated it to me as well. Like, again, you had so much in your verbiage and in your text to me, like there was a lot of sort of, hey, it's not just, I don't want to talk to you today. It was also how you said it in terms of, oh, next week I can make time, or let's talk next week. And so again, it is about how, but sometimes you may not have space, emotional space, capacity to even communicate the how so well, right? Sure. So of course, like try your best, but at the end of the day, if this is a friend that knows you and knows that there's nothing against them, they will understand that. So yes, it has to do with obviously on the receiving end and how they perceive it, how strong they are internally, and like how they are not going to let their ego get in the way. Because if this is really someone that is not meant for you, like yeah, they might be mad, right? They might get upset about what you just said to them, and they might leave, quote unquote, or they might make you feel really bad because in the past they might have achieved that, right? Which I've had that encounter many times where I thought I was really able to set the boundary, and then the other person got really mad. I don't know if that happened to you, but
I think that's so true, because I think some people are not healthy in that sense, where they push people's boundaries. They know they can continue pushing because they were successful with somebody else. And so they think that it's also okay to do with you. And that's where I know when I was younger, I allowed it. Now I am trying more and more to not allow that and to identify that behavior early. So I 100% understand where you're coming from. I know there are people who are not very toxic in that way.
Yeah, and that shows such growth on your end too, because, and yes, I've had people that thought they could do that, but also they didn't just know they could do it with other people, they knew they could do it with me in the past. Right. And that's actually, I think, one of the hardest pieces when you've been friends with someone for so long, and maybe you just adhere to whatever they wanted to do, right? And this has been great for them over the years. And then now that as we're maturing, we're like, there are certain things I actually don't like about this friendship. So let me actually speak up. And now that I'm a little bit more confident, right? And they might think, wow, where is this coming from now?
Yeah.
Let's just shut that right down. And so it's on you to really stand your ground. And if this friendship is meant to last, they will come around, but it will be uncomfortable and it will be hard. And you just have to stick through it, because what's the worst that can happen? Yes, this might leave, but then you were never even like meant for that friendship. So I think it's
Yeah.
important. At the end of the day, you want to have your own back, right? Like all we have at the end of the day is ourselves. And if something doesn't serve us, if something doesn't feel right, we have to speak up. So
Yeah, that is so true. And to be fair, in my mind, the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. I don't know if that is always the case. That is the feeling that I get. I feel like part of, because I keep talking about when I was younger, it was harder to do, or people push my boundaries and I wasn't able to set it. I think part of it is just I just didn't have enough time. Like I just was young and I haven't had enough time to practice setting boundaries with people, or observe other people setting boundaries with me. And I think part of the whole like practicing part not only is like practicing how to deliver a particular message, but it's also like just practicing setting small boundaries over and over again with the same person, with different people. Once you experience, like for example, when you ask me of an example where I set boundaries, I think of mine with you most recently, but likely throughout our relationship we've had multiple boundaries set. They were just little and it didn't feel like a huge ask. And that's why leading up to now, I know that I can effectively set a boundary with you very quickly and like effectively.
yeah.
But I think it took multiple boundaries to get to this more comfortable space. And I think sometimes having more time to practice and being observant when other people are practicing setting boundaries with you can actually be a really good almost like level setting or like upskilling yourself to be able to do that in the future. And I think like, I don't know, maybe you'll get to this. I would love to hear like how you prioritize, but I can imagine like once you prioritize the things that you cannot give up, or like these are your priorities, then you will feel more comfortable setting boundaries against those priorities. But I would love to hear like just from your perspective, and I know you've done a lot of work and you've attended like courses even on stuff like this. What are some like real tactics that people like myself or our audience can like leverage when thinking about this, especially for people maybe who are a little younger, haven't had the chance to practice, or even like introverts who don't feel comfortable speaking up? How do they guide themselves through this journey?
Yeah, I love that question. And yeah, so for our listeners, I think so one of the courses that I took in one of my MBA classes was really helpful. It was around having difficult conversations, dealing with conflict, and setting boundaries. So one of the main takeaways I got from that was and I used to be totally the target audience. So they said, if you have a hard time setting boundaries with certain people, start small. In a sense, start it with the people that are least risk to you. So to me, my biggest risk was my mom. And then there would be people I was dating, and then there would be friends, and then there would be actually coworkers. So, and then acquaintances. So literally make a list of like a rank. Where's the least risk to highest risk? And then start practicing, like Jane said, literally with some of the people where you have lowest risk of, and it's perceived risk, right? So it's all about perception. Where do you see or perceive the least risk in terms of losing this relationship? Because that's what at the end of the day is holding us all back. That's the root cause of why we're not setting boundaries, because we think that person might leave us or they might be upset. So that is at the root. So yeah, make a list of least to highest risk for people. And then for our introverts, again, I'm also an introvert, I had to write it out. Honestly, I couldn't just do it on the spot. So if I had a problem with something, I would force myself, and I mean, I'm a big journaler, but I would also just write it all out. Like what is it exactly that I want to say to this person? And then the third piece is, if you really still not feel comfortable enough to share it with them directly, first of all, practice it with someone in a safe space. So whether it's, I would call, like Jane, if I had a problem with my mom or something, like I would feel comfortable enough to share, like role play with you. If you were my mom, I would tell you what I feel and how I would set the boundary, and you would give me real-time feedback. Again, not everyone is ready for that, but find a friend that is safe space where they can offer you to give some advice and feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that would be like in a nutshell. Do you have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah. I know we talk a lot about like the negative consequences of setting a boundary with a friend, right? We keep talking about like, oh, people are worried that they would lose a friend, lose a family member, right? And it can completely happen. So I'm not dismissing that concern, but also sometimes I feel like I need to remind myself. So also just want to remind the audience, sometimes it's not going to be that bad. Like
Oh,
I,
it's never going to happen, but that's what the fear is,
but
though.
that's what you're worried, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
And
yeah.
like
No, it won't happen
in
usually. I mean,
reality,
unless, yeah, you're right. But
if it does happen, that probably was not a healthy relationship to begin
exactly,
with,
yeah, that's the whole,
right?
but that's at the core of our fear.
Right, right.
So yeah, continue. Sorry.
And I think, but that's the thing, right? I feel like we are so concerned about it, and I know it's easier said than done because I am also the type of person that spirals out of control in my own mind. And the longer it takes for me to do that confrontation, whether it's setting about it, whatever kind of confrontation, I get in my own mind and I start thinking about like the worst possible scenario that would come out of this situation. And number one, it never really happens. And my therapist has told me to anchor on what actually is happening, what has happened before. Like when you set a boundary with that person before, how did they behave? Were they furious at you and they like no longer want to see you? No, maybe not. And so they're likely not going to have that response this time around. So anchoring on previous experience with that friend or family. But yeah, I think just also reminding yourself like, what's the worst that could happen? Like you are respecting yourself by setting that boundary. You are giving yourself time. Part of it is also respecting your friend, that you want to show up in a very like positive way and bring joy to this relationship. So like it's all in good nature, really, ultimately. So just want to put that out there. I feel like there are, to your point, very tactical ways. But also emotionally it can get really, really tough. So just want to remind people of that as well.
Yeah, just double click on this. You're raising the bar for the friendship too, right? And I
Yes.
think your friend is, if they're the right friend, they're going to see that and respect that so much that it will inspire them for their next time when they
Right.
feel like they might have to set a boundary with you, and it might make them feel more comfortable. So
Yeah. And
absolutely.
like, frankly, setting boundaries is almost like a start to allow them to do the same for you. It's like almost like opening a door, right? Because
Yeah.
I feel like if your relationship is always this like perfect thing and like that's all great, but at some point somebody needs to like start this process. And
Mhm.
so setting that initial boundary, while small, it could start really, really small. It almost like allows your friend to know that in the future, if they needed that, they can do the same with you because you've requested that of them. So I think like all of that, like there's so much positive that can come out of you setting that boundary beyond just serving yourself. It should ultimately also serve your relationship with your friend as well. So anyways, I feel like we're scrambling or we're rambling on here. But I think this is so timely because we just did that with each other recently. And I feel like this is such a constant thing. And I'm
Yeah.
sure it's applicable for everybody in our audience here. And we really want to hear from you guys here in the audience as well. If you have thoughts, if you have ideas for how to effectively set boundaries, or if you have ideas for our future podcast topics or areas where it's really gray, email us at where'sthelinepod@gmail.com. And for folks who are not subscribed yet, we would love for you to join our journey and subscribe on any of the platform that you are listening to us on. Thanks, everybody. Bye.